just as background, my name is Ryo Ishida. I'm based in San Francisco, and I've worked in commercial real estate for the last 10 plus years or so, mostly working in private equity and development. And then a few years ago, I co-founded Rainbow Capital Partners. And Amy and I were just chatting about this the other day, but really at the heart of what we do is we invest in opportunists in commercial real estate. And what does that actually mean? You know, over the past few years, we've built this pretty eclectic community of, hundreds of real estate developers and operators. And the folks in our network are, people from tech backgrounds disrupting real estate, or industries like ghost kitchens or the cannabis industry, where there is lack of competition from institutional capital. And what's most interesting, I find, is that most of our developers and operators, I think close to 95%, happen to be either, Asian, people of color, females, or LGBTQ+. And it's really interesting. I think the common denominator of the people in our network, just like folks on this call, is that they are at the core really bleeding heart, capitalists and opportunists. So, some of our most profitable properties have been in markets like Baltimore, Maryland, or, Southeast Los Angeles. And it's not because these folks are charitable. It's actually quite the opposite. It's because they see opportunity and limited competition in these markets. So anyhow, today's panel, will highlight some amazing kind of opportunists in commercial real estate in honor of Asian American Pacific Heritage Month. So with that, thank you to the panelists, Ginny, Gloria, Hines, as well as my friend Hines, who helps us co-host with SF Women in Real Estate. And we'll continue to do these events. Last month we did one for Women's History Month. So let Hines or I know, if you have any cool topics that you want to cover in the future, we'll definitely get to them. So hopefully I won't have any more technical issues, but with that background, let's have the panelists introduce themselves. And why don't we start with Gloria?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm so honored to be part of this conference. Thank you for inviting me, Rio. I miss the San Francisco team. We get together a lot through the years, and I feel I'm still part of them. So I'll be visiting you guys in the near future. Anyway, I've had over 30 years of experience in real estate. It's almost like it found me. I was really an electrical engineering major in the Philippines. And when I came to America, my dad, who's from England, my mom remarried an Englishman and we were adopted. And she said we couldn't afford to go to college, so I had to work. And I've always loved math, and I went to Aetna in the accounts receivable of insurance policies of property managers. That's how I got started with real estate. Eventually became the controller of Draper and Kramer. I was hired away from Aetna, and then they transferred me to property management, portfolio management, and moved to LA and became an asset manager for TCW. So it's almost like it was just destined to be that way. And eventually I was handling at TCW, the CalSTRS portfolio, and the investment officer from LaSera moved to, from CalSTRS moved to LaSera. And then he invited me to apply for that job, and the rest is history. So 10 years at LaSera, and then UC Regents called and said, would you like to start the real estate asset class? And I was there for 15 years and built a $5.5 billion portfolio. Retired last year, and now I've resurrected, and now I'm on the dark side or the enlightened side, whatever you call it. And with Alpine Grove Partners as a partner, and the only woman partner with 8 partners there. And we invest in operating companies in Western Europe and Japan, and hopefully US someday, but I'm having a great time. Thank you.
Awesome. Gloria, that's such an interesting background. We'll kind of dive into a lot of that. And then next we'll have Hines, if you can introduce yourself, that'll be awesome.
Thanks, Rio. Hi, everyone. Hans Lee, zooming in from Hines's downtown San Francisco office, where I'm a senior managing director. First, I want to thank Rio for bringing us together for this forum. And then second, before talking about myself, I just do want to mention a hero of mine who we lost earlier this month. and that's Norm Mineta. He's a San Jose native, former mayor, first Asian American U.S. cabinet secretary, and the only cabinet secretary to serve both Democrat and Republican president. I think many of you may know during World War II, he and his family were interned in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, and that's where he met his lifelong friend, the then future Republican Senator Alan Simpson, through a Boy Scout visit at the internment camp. And together they served in Congress, where they co-authored the Civil Liberties Act, which granted reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned. So I just wanted to mention it because his legacy is amazing and should not be forgotten. So like many of us, my story begins with my parents, both of whom are Korean immigrants who separately started their adult lives in Germany, where they met, married, and had me. And when I was 4, we immigrated again for them, this time as a family, including my brother, from Germany to the United States on the East Coast. And until I went to Stanford after graduating from high school, I really wasn't surrounded by many Asian Americans and didn't really give a lot of thought to my identity. However, someone who was born without citizenship to any country, I very much embraced being an American. And after I was naturalized when I was 12, that really was a source of pride for me. I attended college on a military scholarship and graduated in civil engineering, and then served on active duty in Germany, coincidentally, with the U.S. Army. And that's when I got exposed to real estate, because I was commissioned into the Corps of Engineers, and all of the U.S. property in Germany was ground leased to the German government. So when I finished my service obligation, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but the Army Corps had piqued my interest in real estate. So I went to business school to explore the interest in real estate, and that's when first time I heard of a company that I knew nothing of, and that company's Hines. So I joined Hines after business school, spent 12 years in all aspects of real estate investment and operations, acquisitions, development, asset management. And then after 12 years, I had an opportunity to take on a role as a market leader for Southern California companies, but up here overseeing the Bay Area for Low Enterprises, and then the Irvine Company subsequently for 7 years. And then returned to Hines in 2018 in a kind of unique intrapreneurial role, developing Hines's in-house co-working platform. And I got that launched. Sort of challenging timing. In 2020, we opened 3 sites, but did get it going, and then returned to the core business of Hines last year, where I oversee a portfolio that includes all major property types of about 10 million feet. So, I mean, since I've joined Hines 23 years ago, I think company's really stepped up its game and commitment to DE&I. I'm happy to share that I've recently been asked to lead a newly formed Asian Heritage Employee Resource Group at Hines.
Yeah, and Hans, what sort of, before we get to Ginny, like what sort of kept you at Hines for 20 plus years? It's sort of an amazing kind of track record and testament to you as well as Hines.
Yeah, well, I think the question is really what brought me back, right? Because I did have that break for 7 years. So it's actually my tenure at Hines is 15. And it's the people. It's really always about the people. I left to take on more responsibility. I wanted to expand my career opportunities. And sometimes you got to, look outside your immediate environment to do that. But I think Hines has changed since I joined 23 years ago. I would hope it has, and both in the soft stuff, as I mentioned, DE&I, and then in terms of just the business itself, we're truly an product agnostic company. I mean, when I left, we were really office developers is what everyone thought of us as, and probably many of you still do. But I could tell you that in my portfolio, I've got 5 industrial assets, 4 multifamily, a retail property that we're repositioning. So it's opportunity and people.
Amazing. And then last but not
Oh,
least,
I'm sorry, can I just ask one question? So Hans, what's the name of the Hines co-working platform?
It's
What's the ID?
called Hines Squared.
Hines Squared. Okay, thanks.
yeah, Hans, we'll ask, a later question I'd love to ask is how that platform has been doing. I know Tishman launched their kind of
Yeah.
co-working platform as well.
Yeah.
But
Happy to talk about it.
yeah, before we dive in, last but not least, I wanted to introduce Ginny. So Ginny, do you want to take a couple minutes to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. Hello, everyone. My name is Ginny Fang. I'm the CEO of G Street Ventures, which is a firm I started just a couple of years ago. We invest and acquire multifamily properties targeting growth markets like North Carolina, South Carolina, also the Utah area. My path into commercial real estate is quite circuitous. I mean, I guess a little bit of my early background. I was born in Taiwan. I immigrated to the States when I was 2 and came to Sunnyvale when there were still apple orchards around, and there were very, very few people of color, Asians in the community. My parents were both, stay-at-home kid. My parents were both, of course, trained as engineers because in Taiwan, that is the ultimate that you can be trained for, and that is what they did. But my father, his dream was always to start his own company, and there was a series of siblings, I'd call, as I grew up, that were companies that he tried to start. But he finally did launch a company, which was a company that made laser heads, and he did quite well and exited actually when I was in college. Anyways, I give that background because I've kind of followed in his footsteps, if you will, to want to bring people together towards a shared mission. Earlier in my career, though, I actually started in the nonprofit sector. So coming out of college, I threw away my pre-med background because that was also part of the early on programming, and actually entered into social justice work in the San Francisco nonprofit sector. And was there for 7-8 years. I ran a community center in the Ocean View, Merced, Ingleside, Excelsior neighborhoods, serving seniors, serving youth, a lot of mental health programming, and really community development work. And that led me more into a path of public policy, becoming much more engaged in public policy. And I hope at some point in time, our conversation today kind of goes in that direction, because I think that with the increased demographic growth of the Asian American Pacific Islander population, that is a real area where our participation can make substantial change for many of the topics we want to address today. But I kind of stayed in the community service sector for 8 years and then decided to get my degree in public policy. So, my graduate degree was at UC Berkeley with the Goldman School of Public Policy. And from there, I was very interested in economic development, specifically international economic development, and went to work for then Mayor Gavin Newsom's office, of course, our governor now. And they, at that point in time, this was 2008, I got a job right before the economy crashed, which was great. The city was looking at how it could position itself to get a little bit more than its fair share of Chinese investment into the United States. Looking at Chinese companies that are moving a location to North America, wanting a North American beachhead, and basically saying, well, if you are in clean tech, digital media, if you are in biotech, you should be here regardless. If you are a Chinese company coming here, you also have the cultural connections. So we kind of leveraged the aura and glow of the mayor's office to kick this off. And I ran that. I was the founding executive director for that under then Mayor Newsom, and ran that for about 3 years. And that was kind of my entree into commercial real estate. We touched on a lot of different industries. At that point in time, if you all know, the San Francisco shipyards has a long history here. Lerner, the developer, master developer there, also with 5 Point, they had a long road ahead of them. At that point in time, I think it was priced as an $8 billion development. What the price tag is now, I 910. But they were looking for they were looking for institutional partners in China in terms of financing. And so as part of this initiative, once again, using kind of the entree point of the mayor's office, being able to help them get started and get connected to some potential institutional partners there. That, long story short, kind of led me to starting up a company called Golden Gate Global. That was sort of my real entry into commercial real estate. Golden Gate Global was started to bring together EB5 financing for the shipyards. And I started that. I was the founding CEO of that company, along with other partners, of course. I ran it, grew it over the course of 7 years. In the course of 7 years, we raised about $600 million. And that was for the shipyards. It was for, we work with Brooklyn Basin with signature properties across the bay from San Francisco. And one of our very fun clients was the Sacramento Kings. We helped finance the new arena, mixed use, retail, hotel, et cetera, development. The road trips with them in China were quite fun. So that was kind of my very circuitous path to commercial real estate. With Golden Gate Global, we work with 1,000 investors coming from 63 different cities around the world, and just about every continent except for the frozen ones. We had in investors, and so that's kind of my route. After I left Golden Gate Global, took a little bit of break from all the running around and traveling, and then launched G Street Ventures. So,
yeah,
very happy to be here
talk a little bit about kind of G Street and what do you guys invest in? Yeah,
it's straight up multifamily. It's actually not like super sexy like cannabis or something new. But in terms of a tried and true path for real estate investment, just looking purely at multifamily, I mentioned our target geographies, Southeast sector, also looking at in the Utah region, but very, very focused on North Carolina right now.
Yeah, and Ginny, I think you're like a prime example of who we love to invest in, right? At the end of the day, right, Ginny went from, the common thread here is people sort of kind of accidentally found their way into real estate. They saw an opportunity to do a career there. And then again, you're a prime example of, you know what, North Carolina, the demographics are growing. Multifamily is still a growing sector. Let me go figure out, how to buy some middle market apartments, do a simple rehab and get a really good return for your investors. So it's funny, at Rainbow, people often ask us, do you actively seek minorities and female entrepreneurs? Do you actively seek middle market deals? And it's sort of yes and no. A lot of it is sort of the chicken and the egg, but a lot of the entrepreneurs and the hustlers and bustlers, just like everybody on these panels, go to where the opportunity is. So it just happens that, we're buying apartments with Ginny, that's middle market in North Carolina, for example. And then kind of on that topic of sort of the common thread between the three panelists, which I find interesting, is sort of accidental, kind of entering the commercial real estate workforce. Are you guys seeing, when you're hiring firms, are you seeing a lot of kind of talent accidentally, getting into real estate, or has the industry sort of gotten too professionalized, where people are looking for Ivy League backgrounds, which Bachelor of Science in economics or finance, an internship at some private equity firm. I'm curious, when you guys are out hiring at Alpine or at Hines or G Street, are you seeing kind of a breadth of talent, or it's sort of kind of one kind of background you're seeing?
I'll start with that. I think as we hire people, we find people both ways. We find people who really are in other fields, and then they got exposed to real estate. I had one intern that I worked with at Alpine Grove. She was an economist, and somehow I affected her, and she's now in real estate. So that's one thing. But people we've hired are very focused on what they want to do. And it seems, and also I guest lecture at UCLA, and I find that the students are really focused on what they want to do, regardless of whether, construction is in vogue. They still want to go into construction development. So we kind of mentor them, say, there's no construction right now, maybe later. So look at other things. But yeah, I think the kids nowadays that I notice are more focused on what they want to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I find it's quite interesting where to me it's really, there's a couple kind of analysts and folks in college who heard about this panel. I was like, absolutely come join, because to me it's really about visibility, excuse me, and just saying, oh, what is Gloria or Hans or Ginny, what do they do? For me, I stumbled into commercial real estate. I didn't even know what, my first job out of college was asset management. And I remember my boss, Jeff Mills at Prudential, asking me, oh, why asset management? And I literally said, oh, I like to manage assets, having no idea what asset management was. But I think it's important for, everybody on this panel to just kind of expose yourself and have visibility so that people can kind of hear about the industry. And then Hans, sort of switching topics a little bit, what are you kind of most excited about at Hines? What are you guys cooking up in 2022?
Yeah, well, I think we're both excited and appreciate the enormity of the challenge of, I think, decarbonization as something that we have to own in our industry. 40% of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from powering our buildings. And tying it to the previous question, I feel like if you're taking that on, you're really going to be appealing to some of the younger people that are getting into the business that want to impact the built environment. They don't necessarily look at it as, oh, I want to be in real estate, but when you say, hey, we're going to do something about saving the planet, making it more habitable, then all of a sudden, I think you find what feels like a more relevant connection. So there's a lot of energy in our organization, and I'd say around the industry, around decarbonization and sustainability. So we're embracing that for sure. We've set 2040 as a goal, so tied to the Paris Accord. And then I think, I think the other area that I'm excited about, but also have a lot of questions, is sort of future of office, right? Some of us are probably zooming in from our home offices and still trying to figure out what the right pattern is, how we organize ourselves as organizations, any business relative to workplace versus home office versus remote.
Yeah, it's amazing sort of how like nascent, right? The intersection of real estate and climate changes. And now in the last really 2 years, we're starting to see a lot of prop tech companies, a lot of real estate developers kind of focused on, it's still pretty kind of early innings industry where, and I read a report where most of these buildings need to be, decarbonized, especially if you're trying to attract European capital. So Hans, are you looking at a lot of, are you seeing a lot of prop tech companies that are trying to disrupt this space or improve it? Or is it more Hines's kind of focus internally on what's the best way to decarbonize a building? Because I'm sure a lot of your investors are starting to care as well.
Yeah, I think the technology is really already there. That we got to focus the effort on implementation. And I'm not suggesting that that new companies shouldn't be out there figuring out better ways to collect data and ways to either reduce embodied carbon or reduce operational carbon emissions. But there's enough out there to where we can just start doing things and moving the needle as an industry. And certainly, an organization as large as Hines, that's where our focus is. We we know who all the material providers are for our development projects. And so we're trying to figure out how to reduce embodied carbon in our new buildings. We've actually been, I'd say, a leader on the sort of operational side in terms of energy, reducing energy consumption. But we're also looking into things like, storage, battery storage, ways to continue to move the needle on the operational side.
Yeah, and it's amazing sort of the tension. Actually, I was at this event last night hosted by Amy, who's on from Park Madison. But this developer was talking about buying an office building in Vancouver. And for 1% of the value, they can make it totally, 100% off the grid. And again, it sort of hits at the theme of these folks are not, doing this as a charity or, it's good for the environment. That's part of it, but a lot of it is actually just making it make financial sense, which wasn't really possible, I would say, probably 5+ years ago. But now sort of the momentum has shifted. And then Hans, before one last question that a couple folks sent me is on the office side, right? The future of office is a big topic. We actually hosted a conference, 6 months ago, and it's really the tale of two cities, two industries, right? San Francisco and tech. Almost has to, because their workforce demands it, will embrace some sort of hybrid environment. And then, finance and folks in New York and real estate are more, hey, you can't build culture and synergy and mentor young folks without, being in the office a majority of the time. So when you on the co-working space and on the office industry in general, what are you seeing? Are you seeing more folks pick up sublease space? Are you seeing your co-working platform kind of expand? Or it's still kind of a wait and see industry at the moment?
Yeah, on Hines Square, our co-working platform, we've put that in pause mode, although I think we're going to pursue our 4th site right here in San Francisco shortly. In terms of just what we're seeing for office occupancy, it probably sounds a bit self-serving for Hines, but we feel strongly that the office place, the workplace, needs to be a remarkable experience. And if it isn't, then you are putting your employee in a position where every day they're waking up and saying, do I really need to be in the office?
Yeah.
And so that, of course, aligns with our view of quality and playing in the Class A space. That said, I agree that our market here in San Francisco and the broader Bay Area, driven by such large tech companies, they're very much comfortable with the notion of remote work, and but they also care about the things you said about with respect to culture and mentoring. So they're just figuring out the right balance. I think in terms of the sort of the corporate real estate footprint, that's really the kind of the math that everyone's trying to figure out, is what's the net reduction, if at all. I've heard a lot of discussion about, okay, we got a little too far with densification. We need our space. Nobody wants to be shoulder to shoulder when someone's got the sniffles. And now when we come into the office, it's more purposeful. We need to be meeting with our colleagues. So all of a sudden there's a sense like we really don't have enough meeting space or collaboration space. And then, if you drive around the Bay Area, it's pretty fascinating to me. Traffic is lighter on Monday than it is on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which is just telling me what I'm hearing is everyone's doing Monday and Friday as their remote days. So it doesn't really work if everyone's working from home on the same days and working in the office on the same days in terms of trying to reduce your corporate footprint. So lots of questions still to be answered. We're actually not seeing a ton of companies shed space. There definitely is sublease inventory, and external growth has for sure slowed. So it is a bit soft right now in terms of the leasing market.
Yeah, it seems just sort of kind of a turning point is coming where Apple announced that their workers will be coming back 3 days a week mandatory. That's one side. On the other side, right, Airbnb just announced they'll be fully remote. And then most companies are sort of somewhere in between. But it is interesting, right? I don't think you can build culture without kind of saying, hey, everybody has to be in on, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you let people pick, and I want to go in on Wednesday and Hans is there on Thursday, then you can kind of never meet. So it will be really interesting. I mean, we should, Hans, it'd be really interesting to even host a whole nother topic on kind of office, state of the office with you, and even, tour Hines Squared. I think that would, even with this group, would be really amazing.
Yeah, happy to. I do just want to close this little segment on by saying that I feel strongly that it's incumbent upon employers, not employees, to create an environment that draws their workers back in. Like, edicts are not going to work. Jamie Dimon is telling people to come back to work and they're like, no, thanks. And so, we as landlords need to help our employers, i.e. our tenants, create that environment to where their employees want to be in the office building, in the workspace. And so, that means having office buildings that are remarkable experiences.
Yeah, Hans, what is that? Like, where's the line in that, right? It sort of reminds me of multifamily and the expansion of the amenities. In the last 10 years, it became sort of an amenities arms race, right? Like the building I live in has anything you can imagine, right? Pool, hot tub, rooftop, 2 rooftops, which was great, right? It makes working out of the apartment much easier. But do you see sort of that, or it's more tapered expectations of let's just have sunlight, let's have more space, let's provide food? What are you seeing kind of in your world?
Yeah, it's all of the above. I think the one thing that everyone now, particularly that has bumped up in value, is outdoor spaces. So, and of course, our climate supports that, and BOMA supports that as rentable. So there's just no reason not to have outdoor spaces in your buildings now. Everyone wants it, and you can justify it economically.
Interesting. And then Gloria, for just to take a step back, you were enjoying, sipping mojitos in retirement. What kind of drew you back out of retirement, and sort of what are you working on at Alpine?
I don't think I'll ever retire. That's what my husband says to me.
Yeah.
I love what I do. So it's so much fun that I don't think I could sit on the sidelines. I retired, I think, because I've done my part, I think, at UC. 15 years is enough, and built quite a legacy, and hopefully, it will go on forever for the professors and the staff. And so I was looking for other adventures and time to take care of Gloria. So now I have a share of the promote, finally, yay. And also in the investment committee, part of the investment committee, and also the ESG officer. So I just feel so energized. I wish I was younger, 40 years old again, but just take care of myself and exercise more and just be there. But anyway, Alpine Grove, I had several job offers, and I had to decide what my next adventure would be. And I said, this has to be my last hurrah, and it has to be a company that I feel the culture is a good fit. And this firm I've invested with since 2007, they were very distressed. The fund was down to 30 cents on the dollar, but yet they behaved well. They lowered their fees. They were very transparent, met with us every month. I was in the LPAC, so very active conversation, how they're going to turn around. We recapped with them, and UC got a 23% IRR the last 10 years. It came to 1x plus. So that tells me also the culture. So I was a consultant for 6 months, and then I found that it's a good fit, that this is a CEO and a team of partners who care about their people. And in fact, during COVID, everybody got a COVID allowance because mothers had problems with caregivers, with their elderly or with their children babysitting. They got an allowance to have a break from work, and also allowance to set up their home offices. And just such a culture of caring, just very, very collaboration, and everybody feels like they're part of a group trying to do a better good for the company. And so I feel good that I'm part of that, and also working with a great team of people. Ariel is here on the Zoom meeting, and she's a superstar in our office. I'm so lucky to be working with her. Fundraising is new to me. I've never fundraised in my whole life. Gosh, I would go to the board and get $1 billion, but now getting 50 million is tough to be fundraising.
Yeah.
And thank God my LP friends have been returning my phone calls. They've been polite and kind. They just said, Gloria, it's not the position you had, it's the person that you are. So that's also something I would kind of advise the younger folks, that really build relationships out there, because your role could change, but your friends will still be there. They'll return your phone call, and it would be a quick no if it's not a fit. But if there's something that would be good for them, they will really, help you. So that's the thing that I'm very grateful for. We haven't closed on, we raised only half of what we're trying to raise, but hopefully go to the finish line. Because of COVID, it's hard to be a new manager, but I'm hopeful that we could get there. And that's just what I'm waiting for.
And what's the platform? What's sort of the thesis on the fundraise?
Yeah, we are a value add strategy, and we only invest in operating companies, and the operating companies are the source of real estate deals. So following on Hans's talk about office, we acquired an office portfolio in London, but more like a serviced office. And you see these beautiful heritage homes that were converted into office. So it's a co-working. It's more like a hotel with lounge areas, with food and beautiful, architecture. And when we acquired it, it was only 65% occupied 18 months ago. And now it's 88% occupancy. That tells you that people are going back to the office, but the premise of this is short-term leases. It's only 1 year lease, but the average, term of tenants is 2 to 3 years. And so they just renew. And it's a very good inflation hedge now that you could renew them every year with higher rents, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to work out fine. And people are happy to have nice windows. It's not like a WeWork where there's endless hallways, but each office has their own window and beautiful scenery. And you're in St. James and Mayfair, next to the Bank of England, close to Buckingham, just walking areas to nice amenities. And our tenants are mostly hedge funds or high-end CEOs who started their own companies, or maybe multinational firms who want an office in London. And we're getting traction also on increased rent. So
Yeah.
it's a good premise. And I think hopefully we could duplicate that in the US, looking at smaller office buildings and have a co-working more like a hotel.
Yeah. I think, that's where we see a lot of opportunity kind of in every niche, not just looking at the real estate and buying great real estate, but having an operator that can operate it really well. So, one of the investments we made years ago was this company called Single Family Residential Fund 3, SFR3. And they're really a bunch of tech folks who sold their company to Google, but saw an opportunity to use tech to disrupt commercial real estate. Especially in the single family rental industry that really Blackstone created, probably 7 years ago. And what they do is really just use tech and machine learning to scale their business. So when we invested, they had a couple hundred homes, they have close to 10,000 homes. But really, I love kind of strategies like that, where you kind of pair a real estate business like a single family or an office, and then have a operations type business to further drive returns. And speaking on the topic of Gloria fundraising, and really curious to hear about Ginny and Hans' perspective too. And in honor of kind of AAPI month, I think I shared a really interesting stat that has gotten a lot of traction from folks. But we work with this amazing professor, Josh Lerner at Harvard Business School, and he collects a lot of data on venture capital, private equity, commercial real estate. And one of the things we were talking about was how Asians account for about 6% of the US population, and it's 30% in the Bay Area, right? So much, much larger here. And as one of the panelists mentioned, they're the largest and fastest growing minority group. So that's one side, right? It's a large percent of the population that's growing. And then the other stat that's really interesting to pair with it that Professor Lerner taught us was that, but Asians only account for 0.2% of firms that are owned, right? The Gloria and the Ginnys of the world, and then manage, right? Including what Hans does, but manage less than 0.2% of assets under management. So in any way you splice it, it's close to zero. And sort of, why do you think that is? Why is there sort of this funding gap? Is it sort of based on our culture of it's harder to be entrepreneurial, it's harder to raise capital? Is it that the opportunities aren't there? Curious, kind of based on your experiences, fundraising and capital raising and managing assets in real estate, kind of each of you, why do you think there's such a gap between population versus, kind of any metric you put on?
Can I answer that first?
Yeah,
I
please
think I'm the
do.
oldest in the group here, so I'll try to just give my experience. I had to go to professional coaching because I've always was good in my work. My work was great, but my head was down all the time. When my senior investment officer was presenting to the board, I knew all the answers, and he would ask me, and he would talk. So she told me to raise your head and be up there. You're not all about the work. Start networking, start attending golf sessions, golf outings, and going to drink cocktails with your CEO if they're getting together, because when they're looking to promote someone, they're going to look at someone that they could identify with, but with your head is down, they don't see you. So you have to be in the inner circle, and it should start also from that's why now I founded Filipinos Institutional Real Estate, which is FIRE, is to mentor and help and educate the young professionals and say, you are part of the group. And yes, you have to be good at your job, but at the same time, EQ and networking is part of your job. You have to be out there remembering who you meet every time you go to a conference. You look next to your classmates will be your future partners in your business. And also nurturing. I have an example for you that Kai, who worked with me for 25 years, she started as an admin assistant at Lerner. She was a property manager, overqualified, but we never treated her like an admin. I gave her all the purchase and acquisitions, all the investment plans for each building. And she was 10 years at Lerner. Then she followed me at UC, another 15 years, and she ended up as managing director. So it's really nurturing also the young ones. I think you get better if you also nurture the young team behind you. And I say to them, you have to learn everything I know so I could do something else. I don't want to be, just doing this all the time. And sharing the information. When people ask you for help all over the world, if it's not confidential, share the information. You can help them. If PDGM or ADIA calls, what about Oakland? Share the information. Maybe in 10 years that you'll get your turn to ask for their help. Help without expectation of return also. That helps a lot.
Yeah, I find our community, first of all, the community is so broad, right? From East Asians to Japanese to Koreans to Chinese to Southeast Asians. It's always been hard. Inez and I were chatting about, even, I don't know if there is a, large commercial real estate, Asian and commercial real estate network, right? Where you can kind of share notes. And it's sort of our own community's fault, right? We're sort of the stereotypical kind of heads down work.
Yeah.
When every now and then you kind of have to, host these things and kind of share notes and say, hey, Hans, am I getting the right promote here? Or where do I have wiggle room? Or I'm getting comped this. Is this sort of market for a fund manager?
Exactly.
So just sharing of notes and building that community is super important, whether you're an Asian or a person of color or a female, right? Just more kind of less heads down as the outsider and more just sharing notes and comparing. And, at the end of the day, a mentor of mine always told me there's no such thing as an original thought. So if you have an anxiety, if you have a insecurity, if you think you're not getting the right promote, everybody else, no matter what color you are or what your ethnic background is, has had that same thought process. And Ginny and Hans, curious sort of, based on your experience, why is there such a funding gap between, Asians in real estate versus sort of the assets they manage as well as the assets, the firms they own?
I think, Hans, if you don't mind, I'll jump in. I think that, some of what you brought up already with respect to the category of AAPI, it is almost it's so big, it's not a manageable category in some ways. And then you also then start slicing it with socioeconomic, immigration patterns, et cetera, et cetera. And then, I don't know those numbers in when you start slicing things. But I think the whole network effect is something that you see impacting, I think, and particularly within real estate, where there's still a lot of it that is kind of like your tangible personal networks And so the impact of what's happening just in the corporate sector itself, in terms of asset under management, like my company, we're small potatoes. Like speaking honestly, we are small potatoes. The companies that are holding true assets and taking a large proportion of what you're speaking about, that is a corporate that is a corporate company that has the same issues of board representation, leadership amongst executives, having career mobility within the company. I think the other panelists can speak more to that than I can. But if I'm looking at deals in North Carolina and South Carolina, and I'm just making an offer, I mean, just getting to that point and getting accepted as an offer, let alone fundraising, there's already a dynamic and network there that you have to have established locally there. I don't know the last time you were in North Carolina or South Carolina, there aren't too many Asians there. And so, I'm walking around like doing a building inspection, or I stand out, and that's just the simple fact of it. So I think that as the country, what part of why we're interested in the Southeast is because there's so much demographic shift into that part of the country, and as that happens more, as there is more representation, it does make a big difference in your network effect. And I think what you were talking about in terms of really pushing to speak to others about comparing salary, what are you negotiating, what are you getting for your interest rate, what lenders are you using, what all of that is really, really important in strengthening that network effect and broadening that network effect, I guess would say. So, but I do think the piece, I started my own company because this gives me the flexibility as a mother, as in terms of entry point and where I feel like I can be effective. My father, I would even say, he was part of HP's first group that went into China, and he was part of kind of corporate world for a long time, and was just like, I'm going to build my own company because it's easier in some ways in getting to an executive level. So I do think that there is still that to navigate, and as it's getting better, but there's still growth there. And I think as we move forward in further generations of a more conscious Asian American identity, along that comes along with presence in politics, political leadership, as well as corporate leadership, I hope that will shift.
Yeah, and to me, it's the first step is really measuring the data, right? Where Professor Lerner always says you can't change what you're not measuring.
Exactly.
And so if you just look at, okay, Bay Area, 30% are Asians, but close to 0% of the capital is raised from Asians, you can kind of figure out, oh, it's sort of, okay, there's a couple kind of underlying opportunities there. And Ginny's a great example, right? Where, okay, I might be in corporate America, but I need the flexibility, and the common denominator of these panelists is your opportunity. So you go, you know what, I'll go off on my own and go buy where there's growth. It's not actually the Bay Area, I'll go buy in North Carolina. And then you kind of have to create this new network effect. Hans, curious, I think Asians are so bad at talking about kind of these issues, right? It's so uncomfortable because that model minority stereotype is true, right? I was always told, my mom was a single mom of 5 and an immigrant. So you just work, you work and it'll show. And it's always worked out for me, right? But I'm curious, have you, not to insult you, Hans, but there, with the age gap, did you experience kind of prejudice growing up at all, or it was more subtle? Curious kind of what your experience was.
Yeah, for sure. Schoolyard comments, both both openly racist as well as microaggressions, now that we sort of understand how those can all be characterized. And in most cases, I think it's just as the root of racism is, it's just ignorance, right? And I really don't think, and in many of those cases, it was someone who outright hated me. But and I, you know, I in terms of, you know, the workplace, though, I think we've come a long way. And in a large organization like Hines, you know, you can there's resources and there's critical mass of people of all different identities, and so that's a good thing, I think. You know, and that said, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we're organizing ourselves so that we can support each other, because I do think that you can, you know, have different types of conversations when you're with different groups of people, including people that you strongly identify with. But regardless, you know, you have to advocate for yourself. You know, I would say, transitioning a little bit about advice is, you know, find both mentors inside and outside the organization. You need them, you need outside too, because you want to be able to speak totally freely about things you're concerned about, or questions you have, some that, you know, in an organization that, you know, may not be comfortable or may have ramifications about raising within a big group. But you know, at Hines, it's interesting. We're pretty good in terms of our percentage. We're about 8%, so even maybe ahead of I'm talking about US. But if you look at those numbers more closely, it's heavily skewed towards accounting. There are very few of us actually in sort of the investment and development side. So I do think there's more work to be done there, because I think there are you know, hidden talents that people have that just for whatever reason they're put into a career track, or they chose a career track for themselves, and they're just sort of on autopilot. So you know, getting together as a group and talking about career development, I think, is a healthy way to maybe unlock some of that potential. And in a tough hiring environment like now, that's, you know, the best sort of hire you can make is the one from inside your organization, right? But you know, the biases exist for sure in our industry, and because we're underrepresented generally in the industry, in the capital side in particular, you know, it's going to take more effort to overcome those biases and to educate people. So I'm really, again, glad that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and that's really where the opportunity is, right? It's not like Asians, everybody on this panel, right? Whether you're Asian, person of color, female, it's not that they want handouts or anything like that. It's actually quite the opposite, right? It's sort of the definition of opportunists and capitalists. And again, it's always sort of, if you start splicing the data, Hans, like you said, it's always funny, right? It's always in asset management or accounting or finance. And hard, you know, the numbers get even kind of, you know, less than 0.2% when you look at acquisitions or portfolio managers. And actually, you know, I know we only have a couple minutes, but that topic is really interesting, right? Where I was talking to a great friend of mine and a great mentor who's in his late 60s now, and he's been a developer in Dallas his entire life. And for him, right, like prejudice showed up in very direct ways, where he would be called kind of names in real estate, et cetera, et cetera. And now I find prejudice is a lot more subtle. And that kind of prejudice is actually, I find harder to combat, right? Where, you know, I have two sisters, and the number one question they get asked in their career is they're Asian, they look young. And if they don't wear, you know, hair and makeup and wear heels, number one question they get asked is, how old are you? Are you the analyst or the intern on this project? Right. And I'm sure, you know, I see a lot of nodding heads where it's always these kind of subtle comments, or, you know, throughout my career, when I went from asset management to acquisitions to capital markets, common theme I would hear was, oh, I didn't realize you could do investor relations and talk with people. And I go, oh, what do you mean by that? It's sort of these kind of these little comments. And again, these people don't mean to be prejudiced in that way. It just, they don't see kind of, you know, examples enough where they're, of Asians in acquisitions or in investor relations. And last point, I think prejudice now shows up to what Ginny said in your network effect, right? It's the people you're compounding interest in relationships. And if you're not intentional about kind of creating a diverse, broad coalition, when you need a female managing director, if you're not hanging out with these people, they're not going to be, in your network and in your trusted network. And then last question that to kind of wrap up the panel is sort of, what's sort of the best advice you received, throughout your career? And it could also be the worst advice, sort of what's sort of your guiding kind of North Star on, what, I wish someone gave me this advice back in my 20s or in my 30s.
I'll start with my mom. She always said, respect everybody, from the janitor to the CEO of the firm. And that to me has always been my guiding light, that I respect everyone. Even though you're terminating someone, you do it with respect and no hidden agendas. Integrity, most of all, don't compromise your integrity. You carry that everywhere. So that's something that has guided me well. And also humility. Don't let the power go to your head. The world changes all the time. Sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're in the bottom. So you never know where you're going to end up. And when you treat people with respect, also, they won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you treated them. So never burn bridges. And I always end up with this with my lecture to the UCLA kids. I say, the toes you step on today is connected to the behind you're going to kiss later on. So please don't never burn bridges. That's something I always tell them.
Can I jump in? Because I'm going to give the exact opposite advice.
Okay, good.
So I think, at least for me, and I maybe other people have this experience. I think because of our common heritage, we over-index the value of humility. I have been told many times, Hans, you're too respectful. In an investment committee meeting or something, it's like, you need to challenge that if you feel differently. So I'm not saying don't, and this is a little bit of do as I say, not as I do, because I truly value humility, and I feel like it's a value that we need more of in America. But there's a balance. So you got to advocate for yourself. You've got to be confident, and if you sort of feel this pull of being humble, realize that probably what you feel like is getting, putting yourself out there isn't really perceived that way by the majority of the people. Like, oh, good. I wanted to hear that. So that would be my advice. The other one would be take on visible leadership roles, particularly if you're asked to just say yes. It's the opposite of Nike. Just say yes. It's someone is telling you they think you can do a job in a leadership position. Seize that opportunity. Just say yes.
And then Ginny, kind of last but not least, any sort of best advice, worst advice that you've ever received?
I think that I would echo the just say yes and the reach. I think that kind of coming from AAPI female perspective, ask for more than you're worth. And because there's no such thing as you'll be compensated for what you're worth. You're compensated for what you ask for, what you negotiate.
Yeah.
And that is something that girls, people of color that do not hear enough, like ask for it, ask for it, ask for it. And if the other side can't give it, they will take care of themselves. I promise you, like they will not. And I think that, and also in terms of like the type of position you want to be in, I did not have a background. I didn't have an MBA. I did not have a finance degree, but I built a company that raised $600 million. So be out there. Don't think that you need to be absolutely ready. You're ready if you just step into it, and you'll figure it out along the way.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. For a lot of folks come to us for salary negotiation or promote negotiation, And the number one kind of things that I've learned from my mentors is really anybody on the outside, minority, female, what have you, is really bad at sharing information. It's not that, the traditional white person had, is faulted. It's actually, they share a lot more, I've noticed. So again, the best advice I've ever gotten in my 20s and 30s is make sure you have a cohort of people that you share lots of information with, right? Salary and, people always say, oh, negotiate for what you want or what you deserve, but it's always hard to figure out without any data. And for me, the best is just talking among my closest kind of peer groups of 10 to 20 friends in the industry and saying, hey, let's compare notes on what promote you're getting, what salary you're getting. Because at the end of the day, right, when Ginny says negotiate your value, the value is really driven by the data. And once you have the data, that's so hard to get unless you build this network effect. You kind of feel not confident, negotiating for what you deserve. So yeah, with that said, I mean, there's so many kind of topics we didn't get to cover on this panel. So maybe we'll do another one. It doesn't have to be kind of next May. I think there's so many kind of different interesting things that we could talk about. So I'll keep kind of everybody on this listserv engaged on a potential topic. And with that, thank you so much to Ginny, Gloria, Hans, Inez from SF Wire, and kind of everybody who contributed. And I'll probably send out a couple questions that we couldn't get to afterwards to see if we can answer them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a
Rio.
wonderful.
Thank you, Rio.
Thank you so much.
One.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Amy. Have a good one.
You too, everyone.